What's up, everybody, and welcome back to episode 9 of the Flying Knee KO podcast. My name is Victor Vasquez. Thank you so much for joining me. I know it's been a few weeks since I had dropped another episode. I wanted to wait for a good main event. Not saying or any disrespect to any other fight nights that occurred the last couple of weeks. Was just a little bit busy with work and just different things. And I was just really pumped for UFC 252, which just happened this past Saturday, August 16th. And it was headlined by DC, Daniel Cormier taking on Stipe Miocic in the trilogy that would end it all. Each man had a victory, one apiece. Just as a reminder, Daniel Cormier ended up getting their first victory of the trilogy by knocking out Stipe Miocic with a nice right hand off of the clinch. Gained his first heavyweight title of his career and added to his legacy. In the second fight, ended up being last year in August 2019 at Anaheim. I was actually there. It was a great time with my good friend Ryan Saw. And we got to see Stipe Miocic get his title back after he made sick adjustments by throwing those body shots right to the solar plex and to the liver of Daniel Cormier, and he regained his title. So now, this past Saturday, August 2020, we got to see the finality of these two men. And again, just two great legends of this sport in the UFC. Two guys that are going to go down in history and will for sure be Hall of Famers. And we got to see this 3-fight event between these two men. And it was just a great night of fights. I feel like I always say that, but this one was really good. Mostly because of the fact that if you saw any advertisements for the fight, you'd see that it was really this headline that was trying to sell this point and pay-per-view for fans. It was DC versus Stipe trilogy, and then you also had Sean O'Malley, the Sugar Show, versus Marlon Chito Vera. Other than that, they really didn't highlight any other fights, but it was a great main card. One of the great main cards of this year in 2020. You had fighters like Daniel Pineda, who just, again, getting his return to the UFC after a 6-year hiatus. He got cut by the UFC, came back, made it basically his second debut, and got a victory over Herbert Burns. You also had Jairzinho Rozenstruik, who tried to make a statement after he lost his last fight against the scary Predator and Francis Ngannou. And again, we had that tough matchup between these two bantamweights of Marlon Chito Vera versus Sugar Sean O'Malley. Just a great night of fights. A lot of great action. I enjoyed myself like I usually do on those fight nights. But for this one, it was a lot of great finishes. It went by so damn fast. And for me, my meter of kind of determining whether a main card is really good is, does it have a lot of finishes? Does it go by so quick that you're like, wow, that's it? That's the event? And typically that's kind of what I gauge in regards to how good a main card is. Again, not an analyst or anything like that. I'm just more of a hardcore casual fan, I would say, kind of in between both. But I enjoyed this UFC 252 main card. So let's talk about it more. Let's delve into what hot topics came out of this past weekend in the segment that I like to call...
I'm here with the winner, Derek Lewis. Derek, why'd you take your pants off? My balls was hot. I understand.
Hot balls coming into this first segment. That was Derek Lewis saying that classic line. And what I want to talk about here is, again, the hot topics or the hot news that may have come out of UFC 252 or really around the world of MMA and UFC. So let's just jump in. Biggest news had to be the trilogy. You can't go by without saying, okay, these two guys just gave us such a great show. It met my expectations for what I wanted to see from this trilogy. In the first fight, like I mentioned earlier, quick victory for Daniel Cormier. Second fight ended up going to the extended rounds, the fourth round actually, where finally Stipe was actually able to knock out Daniel Cormier after he made the nice adjustment to throw shots to the body. In this third fight, I was really hoping, my expectations were that it was going to go 5 rounds. I wanted it to be a war, back and forth, trying to see, okay, who is the better heavyweight? Which guy is going to make the proper adjustments? And that's exactly how it played out. I loved every minute of that fight, and we'll probably get to it a little bit later in a different segment. But DC and Stipe just, oh man, they lived up to the hype of what a trilogy should be. There's times where trilogies don't live up because either the first fight or the second fight was probably the most exciting. And obviously, you know, they each had their moments. But it was just beautiful to watch both guys knowing what was at stake in that trilogy fight. Knowing that, okay, for DC, this is really for his legacy. This was his last fight. He was going to retire with a win or a loss. For Stipe, it was more about cementing his legacy at heavyweight. Knowing that, you know what, he's still got a few more fights under his belt that he wants to do before he retires. And having 2 victories over Daniel Cormier is just going to prove why he is the greatest UFC heavyweight of all time. Now, there might be, obviously great debate in regards to who the other great heavyweights are. But currently in this generation and the way that Stipe has performed in this division for the championship, all those title victories and title defenses, there's just no question that this guy is at the top in the heavyweight division. Now, talking about that trilogy, obviously it's great action between these two guys. I just mentioned what this means really for their legacies. And it was just a great fight overall. Again, maybe to other people, it might have been different. For some, it might be fight of the year. Not for me. I still consider Joanna Jędrzejczyk versus Zhang Weili as the fight of the year. But this one was really good. Back and forth action. Each guy could have taken a round depending on how you viewed the fight. I actually had it 4-1 for Stipe Miocic. A lot of other analysts and reporters were mentioning that it could have been 3-2. The first round and the third round were very close. Each guy had their moments. Stipe Miocic actually ended up knocking down DC with a couple right hooks. He continued to throw it along the cage, and it actually landed a few against DC's chin, and it ended up knocking him down I believe it was near the end of the second round. But just a lot of great action from these two. I loved it, and again, I want to give a huge congratulations to Stipe Miocic for defending his heavyweight title, and a big shout out to DC as well. He's a legend, man. He's such a nice guy. Obviously didn't end the way that he wanted it to end. He wanted it to finish out right off into the sunset with the championship. It didn't go his way, but that does not take away from what his legacy is going to become. He's for sure still top 10 all time in the UFC. And now we should start considering where Stipe is going to land. We always mention that, okay, if Daniel Cormier ends up winning the heavyweight title, retires, he's for sure top 5 then, all time in the GOAT conversation. He didn't get there, so that might eliminate him from the top 5. That's not going to eliminate him from the top 10. But now you got to consider, where does that put Stipe? Having 2 victories over a future Hall of Famer in Daniel Cormier, defending the heavyweight title now for 5 different occasions. And now we start seeing, okay, who's going to be next for Stipe? What other names are going to get added to his legacy? And I just can't wait for that. So we'll probably be talking about more of the future for Stipe Miocic. But again, wanted to give a congratulations to Stipe Miocic for retaining his heavyweight title. And for DC for the nice retirement. Hopefully he enjoys being a commentator, because I love hearing him next to Joe Rogan and John Anik. All right, got one more piece of news that I wanted to cover in this Hot Balls segment. And it's actually about a fighter that didn't even fight over the weekend. And that fighter is Jon Jones. That's right. If you didn't hear, over the weekend, he actually ended up tweeting and deciding that he is going to vacate the light heavyweight title. It is up for grabs now. He is not the champion no more. The reason of that is now he has talked to the UFC. He said that there have been some positive conversations going back and forth, and there is a chance that he could be moving up to the heavyweight division, something that has been discussed throughout his career, and it's almost becoming a reality. So now I'm sure that the money is starting to be discussed, because I know that was really a talking point for Jon Jones and the UFC. So if the money's right and the opponent is right, Jon Jones could be fighting again, maybe in the near future, maybe this year in 2020, against a heavyweight contender in the top 5. It's going to be very curious to see what will be next for Jon Jones. But this also provides more of an interesting topic for the light heavyweight division. This is going to be really the first time where there's no more Jon Jones, no more Daniel Cormier in the light heavyweight division. So now we're going to have a new champion for the first time in over 10 years. So it should be interesting to note that at UFC 253, it was actually just announced over the weekend as well that Jan Blachowicz is going to take on Dominic Reyes. And now, at first it seemed like, okay, it's just going to be this is who's going to fight Jon Jones next. Instead, now this is going to turn into fighting for the vacant light heavyweight title. It hasn't been announced yet, but I'm assuming that has to be the clear indication for what these two guys are going to fight for. And it's actually going to be a co-main event to that main event at UFC 253, which is actually going to be Israel Adesanya versus Paulo Costa. So that card is shaping up to be an awesome main card, and I cannot wait to watch that main event and co-main event if it does become for the vacant light heavyweight title. It was fun to see Dominic Reyes, if you guys don't remember, ended up getting a very close chance of taking the title away from Jon Jones. I believe that fight was in February of this year, but the judges ended up going with Jon Jones. And then Jan Blachowicz actually just got a victory over Corey Anderson by knockout. So both guys still on the rise, still very young, so I am pumped to see who's going to be the new light heavyweight champion if they do end up going for that title in September. All right, well, that was the hot news that I wanted to cover in that first segment. Let's go ahead and jump into my favorite fight of UFC 252 in the segment that I like to call...
Let me bang, man. I want to do that, man. I do.
Let Me Bang Bro segment. Two guys that just put on a show, or women as well, could be considered in this Let Me Bang Bro segment, who was really the fight or the barn burner of this past weekend. And I kind of spoiled it. It was two guys that ended up fighting, and it's actually going to be the main event. I know it's probably a cop-out, but to me, as I mentioned this fight had so much stakes on the line. So many different ways it could have gone. It could have had an early finish. Instead, we ended up getting a war between these two guys. Such a very close fight, and it met my expectations, which is why I had to choose it for this second segment of the Flying Knee KO podcast. Stipe Miocic versus Daniel Cormier 3 gets the Let Me Bang Bro segment special right here. So let's go ahead and kind of talk what were my favorite moments of the fight. Like I mentioned, every round was so damn close. That first round, I was really on the edge of my seat. My hands were sweating. I just didn't know which way it was going to go. I was really on the fence. And it just started off really well for Stipe Miocic. He was mixing up his offense very well. Threw a lot of leg kicks, which we hadn't seen in the first two fights. Throwing, again, that body shot. Knowing that, okay, now both guys know Stipe had a lot of success with the body shots in that second fight. But now DC should know defensively that, okay, I can't just keep my hands up all the time. I got to keep them at a nice balanced rate right here so that he knows that, okay, I can either get ready and anticipate any body shots, but still protect my head. And Stipe, again, just mixed it up so well. He even threw a couple of high kick. I think he even threw one high kick early on in that fight. So again, Stipe making the proper adjustments to know exactly when to mix it up in order to confuse Daniel on the defensive end. But again, very close first round. And then at the end of that first round, probably the last 20 seconds, Daniel ends up landing a nice little overhand right that stuns Stipe a bit. It looked like he was about to stumble, but he did not. He kind of caught himself, got back up, and then the round ended. So a lot of people probably saw that and thought, okay, that was a very close round, but it seems like maybe Daniel had more of the significant strike. I still had it as Stipe winning that first round just because of the fact, like I mentioned, his offense was just rolling. He was throwing exactly what he needed to do and sticking to the game plan. Second round was for sure Stipe Miocic. Again, I mentioned it earlier, ended up throwing multiple right hooks as Daniel Cormier was sliding to his left along the fence, and one of those just caught his chin, knocked him to the ground. He quickly got back up, and Stipe tried to land a few more right hooks, and the round ended up ending at that point. The bell rang, and Daniels just seemed like he was stunned as he went to his corner, and his coaches were telling him, hey, stay focused, stick to the game plan, everything's all right. And you could just see that he was kind of a little dazed, and even throughout that third round, he kind of took it off. He was just trying to regain consciousness, regain his energy that he had in that first round. But Stipe completely controlled that second round. Third round, again, it was all Stipe Miocic. Then the fourth round came by, and that was really Daniel's best round. He started, again, throwing more of his offense. He started even throwing some leg kicks in. And just, you could see that Stipe was just trying to, again, wait for the perfect opportunities to throw the right punches. Both guys, again, with great speed in their hands, landing some good shots. And you got to give it up for both of their chins. I mean, even though they both seemed like they got stunned in the fight, they were taking some bombs from each other. But at the end of the day, that 5th round came by, and Stipe just did what he had to do. He just kept trying to stick and move, land some nice right hands, and just, again, he stuffed a lot of the different takedowns attempts that Daniel Cormier tried to do. And that's really one thing that I wanted to get into a little bit more, is that I was very surprised DC didn't try to take down Stipe Miocic more. He had success in the second fight, able to take him down off of the clinches and just try to get those double legs or single legs. But in this one, he didn't. He tried it a few times early on in the first round, but it just didn't come into fruition. And that was all Stipe, just defending really well, keeping him off him. And every time they clinched up and got along the fence, it was really Stipe that was in control of those situations. So props to Stipe for knowing exactly, okay, if you know that DC is probably going to try to add more wrestling to his game plan, but unsuccessful for Daniel Cormier. And then in the end, ended up going a unanimous decision victory to Stipe Miocic. Such a back and forth battle. Again, I had it more in favor for Stipe Miocic. He did everything he could, adding the body kicks, adding the leg kicks, throwing in those overhand rights, and just peppering DC with some shots and absorbing some shots as well. Stipe just at his peak really in this fight with Daniel Cormier, and now he can finally kind of shut the door of even thinking about facing off DC and focus on another fighter, which we will talk about at the end of this Flying Knee KO podcast. But for the Let Me Bang Bros segment, I gave it to Stipe Miocic versus Daniel Cormier 3 in that main event last Saturday. All right, now let's jump into segment number 3. This is where I like to select a fighter that fought in the past Saturday's fight night and that really didn't surprise me with their performance. And this segment is actually called...
Hey, I'm not surprised, motherfuckers.
Nate Diaz wasn't surprised, and I wasn't surprised by this fighter's performance at UFC 252, and that was Merab Dvalishvili from the bantamweight division. The dude's a machine. That's his nickname when he comes into the cage, but he took on a tough challenge in John Dodson, and he just had so much success on the feet. He was just able to kind of disrupt the offense of John Dodson, didn't allow him to get in range, and he just kept kind of feinting, moving his head, keeping out of that range of striking for John Dodson, and just made it uncomfortable for him. Now, if you don't know, Merab is just such a beast at grappling. He took down his last opponent 13 different times. Before that, he took down his other opponent 12 different times. So you know the game plan when you face off against Merab. He's just going to try to pummel you with a few shots, stand and bang for a little bit, and then drag you down to the floor. Very similar to the game plan of Khabib, how he just tries to grind on you and just smash. That's all he loves to do, and just suffocate you. So Merab has that same style and the same skills on the ground. But Dodson, my goodness, we have to give this guy credit. He stuffed 18 of Merab's takedowns, and especially with the grappling ability of Merab. I mean, even he was surprised that Dodson was able to just stuff so many of those takedowns. And even the 2 takedowns that Merab was able to get, Dodson immediately jumped from the floor, got off the canvas, and got back to his feet. So there was never a point where Dodson was in trouble on the ground. He just did not allow Merab to keep him there for longer than a second. And it was just beautiful to watch. But again, we have to go back to the credit that is going to be given to Merab. He is just putting every bantamweight on notice. And again, bantamweight division, spitting out these killers. Now, you have so many guys like Cody Garbrandt. You had Corey Sandhagen. You have, obviously, Piotr Jan, who just won the bantamweight title. Now you have this guy in Merab who is just showing off those grappling skills, and it just shows it's going to be huge problems for whoever he faces next. And again, like I mentioned, every round, he would just be controlling the octagon. He'd be controlling the pace, kind of going in and out, landing some nice punches. He even threw a great combination where he did a nice little spinning back fist, kind of grazed the chin of John Dodson, and then from that spin, threw a right hook that landed flush. And then it didn't knock down Dodson, but you could just see that what Merab was throwing at John Dodson, he just wasn't ready for. He just didn't have the proper game plan. So Merab just put on a great performance against a tough challenge, probably his toughest challenge in regards to takedown defense. So probably after getting through that, he's going to be able to take down any individual, obviously, that doesn't have that kind of background that Dotson has in wrestling as well. So great performance and a great victory for Merab. And it should be very interesting to see who is the next guy that's going to have to deal with that grappling pressure of Merab. So congratulations to him, and hopefully we get to see him in the octagon again soon. All right, from talking about a fighter that we weren't surprised of, now I want to jump into a fighter that I was surprised of in the next segment that I like to call...
Who the fuck is that guy? Who the fuck is that? You know damn well who I am. Who the fuck is that?
Who the F is that guy? And for this specific fighter, I'm going to choose Marlon Chito Vera, another bantamweight contender that is rising up the ranks. He actually ended up being in the co-main event and took on the Sugar Show, Sean O'Malley. The hype train is real for Sean O'Malley. Everybody was picking him to get this victory over Chito Vera. And Chito shut all of that down. So this man deserves that spotlight, deserves that kind of highlight that he needed to get in his career to kind of get more momentum and get more people talking about his success. Again, had a lot of kind of great victories over the past 7 fights. It currently now has won 6 of his last 7 fights. His last loss was actually against Song Yadong in the bantamweight division. But now with the victory over Sean O'Malley, this will for sure put him in the top 15 of the bantamweight division. So another guy to keep your eye out on in regards to the bantamweight division. Now, let's go ahead and discuss this one. He actually ended up getting a first-round TKO over the rising star, Sean O'Malley. And how he did that was just, well, let's go ahead and break it down. It only lasted 1 round, and it was actually Sean O'Malley who came out really good. He landed about 4 different body kicks that were just landing every time he threw them against Chito Vera. And you could see Vera try to catch a few of them, but it just didn't have that much success. And then you could just see that Sean O'Malley was just trying to feel out Chito Vera, trying to see where he could just pick his moments, have the good opportunities, and land a big strike. But it's always going to be a tough challenge to take out a guy like Marlon Chito Vera. Dude's a straight savage. And then all of a sudden, you see Sean O'Malley kind of roll his ankle, and he kind of just falls to the floor. And you notice that, okay, something's wrong. He starts limping, and he switches stances. He switches to a southpaw stance. And now, okay, you notice something's wrong with his leg. I apologize, not from a southpaw. He changed to an orthodox stance. And then you start seeing that he can't put that much pressure on it, can't land the same amount of strikes. Even though he's very skilled on both sides from southpaw and orthodox, you can tell that something was bothering him. And Chito picked up on that. And then at one moment, O'Malley tried to land a couple 1-2 combinations. He ended up falling on the floor because of the pressure on his right leg. And Vera just came on top of him, got top position, and just landed some nasty ground and pound. Actually ended up throwing a right elbow that just hit the forehead of Sean O'Malley that made his head kind of bounce off the canvas. And you could see that his head kind of just started dazing. His eyes might have rolled back a little bit. It looked like he wasn't defending as well. He took another big elbow and some ground and pound, and the referee was forced to stop the fight. And Chito Vera gets the biggest victory of his career against, again, a talented Sean O'Malley. And then, you know, a lot of people were like, oh, well, you know, it kind of sucks that O'Malley got injured. You know, it doesn't seem like it should be a straight victory for Chito Vera. But after further review, that's right, I was kind of looking at Reddit. If you guys haven't seen it already, there's actually a breakdown of a kick that Chito Vera lands in the first round that actually is the reason that causes Sean O'Malley's leg to give out on him. And it was crazy. If you haven't had the chance, check it out either on YouTube or look it up like that. Chito Vera kick against O'Malley. Chito Vera ended up landing a calf kick that hits like the back of the calf, like around the back of the knee of his right leg. And as soon as he lands that kick, his ankle kind of gives out. And what it really ended up happening is that he hit a nerve in that calf. And because of that nerve damage that just caused by the calf kick, it ended up just making his right leg numb, which is the reason why he was rolling his ankle. And it happened twice. And so after people started seeing that's the kind of credit that Chito Vera needed, because a lot of people were thinking, well, it's really O'Malley that kind of injured himself and cost him that victory, that loss actually, his first loss of his career. But no, it was Chito Vera who just threw the perfect calf kick that just created all that chaos and the numbness in Sean O'Malley's right leg, and that's what led to the ground and pound. So all credit has to go to Marlon Chito Vera, who, like I mentioned, is on a good streak right now, but now he's looking to try to climb those bantamweight rankings. And like I mentioned, so many damn bantamweight killers in this division, so it's going to be very interesting to see who's going to put up a good challenge against Marlon Chito Vera, and how far can he go? Is he a title contender? Can he face and beat some of these top 5 guys? We'll have to wait and see, but congratulations to Marlon Chito Vera for getting this victory. And again, like I mentioned, for Sean O'Malley, it's not something that would diminish, his run that he was going on. That he can always kind of fall back on that, I was injured. So I would not be surprised if in the near future there should be a rematch between Marlon Chito Vera and Sean O'Malley. Hopefully his injury is nothing too serious. He'll come back even stronger. And I'll be there waiting to see the Sugar Show come back into the octagon. Alright guys, now we've come to the final segment of the Flying Knee KO podcast, and it's one of my favorites. This is where really we kind of break down for the main event winners of UFC 252. Who are they going to fight next? Really, it's a bias by me because I want to fantasy book and determine these are the fights that I want to see. I really want to see these in the next couple of months, years. So let's go ahead and break those down in the segment that I like to call.
Oh, I said I'd knock him out in the 4th round, and I knocked him out in the 4th round. You can call me Mystic Mac because I predict these things.
Mystic Mac is the name of this segment, so we are going to try to predict what is next for the main event winners. Let's start off with the man that we discussed in this prior segment, Merab Dvalishvili, who got a victory over John Dodson. Again, his grappling is going to be a big problem in the bantamweight division. Again, he faced off against his toughest challenge in regards to takedown defense of Dodson, who is just so skilled, so slippery when he gets, taken down to the ground. He just finds this way and has a knack to escape and get back to his feet. For our next opponent for Merab, he actually wanted to face off against Sean O'Malley and try to shut down that hype train. Spoiler, it ended up being Chito Vera that ended up stopping the hype train for a little bit. So why not put the co-main event winner of Marlon Chito Vera versus Merab Dvalishvili? That would be such an awesome bantamweight matchup. Really, one of the many matchups that we've already seen this year. We got to see Henry Cejudo versus Dominic Cruz. We got to see Corey Sandhagen versus Aljamain Sterling. And now we get to see another one in this Merab Dvalishvili and Marlon Chito Vera face-off. I would love to see that. Let's hope the UFC can book those two guys. At times, they might not want to book two potential fighters that could be title contenders so early on, but it would be such a great story if they have faced off and then eventually face off if one of these guys becomes champion. So we'll see what's next for Merab, but I hope it is against Marlon Chito Vera. All right, next guy on the list is Daniel Pineda. He is a featherweight. Got his great performance at UFC 252 by getting a TKO victory over Herbert Burns, the brother of Gilbert Burns, who is a potential welterweight title contender. Daniel Pineda controlled the fight from the get-go. He just showed off his ability on the ground, even by controlling Herbert Burns, who is a black belt in jiu-jitsu. Kept him on the floor, had so much control time, and then in the end, at the second round, got him in a crucifix and landed some bombs with his elbows and left hand. And he ended up getting that TKO victory. So congratulations to Daniel Pineda. This is actually his first fight in the UFC since 2014. So he was very emotional after the match. He got cut 6 years ago, got another opportunity, and he stepped up and he put his name out there on UFC 252 and he took advantage. So happy that he got the victory. So why not the UFC just reward him with another fight this year? Maybe against guys like Makwan Amirkhani in the featherweight division, or Grant Dawson, or even Andre Feely. These guys all have victories in their last matchups. They all don't have opponents in the next couple of months. So it'd be interesting to see where Daniel Pineda can kind of learn a little bit more and improve. He has so many fights already under his belt. I believe he has over 35 fights in his MMA career. But I do want to see him get one more victory under his belt before he gets a top 15 matchup. All right, next fighter in this UFC 252 main card that got a victory was Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Biggie boy back in the octagon, trying to get that bad taste out of his mouth after the loss to Francis Ngannou, where he got finished in one round. And how do you get that bad taste out of your mouth? Well, by getting a knockout victory over a tough Junior Dos Santos. Now, this one only lasted 2, but JDS was just having a lot of success, just finding his moments, picking his shots. But Jairzinho is just a one-shot killer. He lands that one bomb, and it is over for you. And that happened with 1 minute and 30 seconds to go in that second round. Jairzinho just found that opportunity through a nice 1-2 combination that dropped JDS to the canvas. And at that point, JDS was just trying to survive. He ended up getting back to 1 foot, and Rosenstruck finished it off with a left hook that dropped JDS on his back. And Jairzinho just piled it on with a few more punches until the referee just stopped the fight. And now Jairzinho back on the win column. So it's going to be very interesting to see what is next, because at the moment, Jairzinho is currently in the top 5 in the heavyweight division. But a lot of them are already booked. So let's go ahead and break it down. You have the champion, Stipe, just got a victory over DC. I don't think Jairzinho deserves to get a title shot off of this victory. He should get one more. Then he can try to fight for the title. You can't jump him over Francis. So, Francis really deserves that title shot. So you can't book Francis versus Jairzinho again. You also have Curtis Blades and Derek Lewis. This was actually just announced today that they will be fighting in October in a heavyweight matchup. So now you can't include those guys as an opponent for Jairzinho. And I don't really think it's ideal to have Jairzinho fight somebody, below the top 5, like, 8, 9, or 10. Because that's not really going to take him anywhere. So hear me out on this one. Maybe somebody has already mentioned this before, but a lot of people might overlook this option. I actually think Jairzinho's next opponent should be John Jones. That's right. The John Jones, like I mentioned in the hot news segment, he's actually going to be moving up to heavyweight. Has maybe a potential fight lined up either late this year or early next year. Why not kind of get a tune-up match against the guy in the top 5 of the heavyweight division? And what better way, or what better guy than Jairzinho Rosenstruck, Biggie Boy, with those powerful right and left hands that can knock out anybody, that can pose a big threat against John Jones. And for John, maybe that's what he wants. He wants people to kind of get that feeling of like, you know what, this guy could maybe knock me out, but I'm going to nullify all of his skills. So why not put Jairzinho versus John Jones for his debut at the heavyweight division? It would give more popularity and more eyes on Jairzinho. And could you imagine if Rosenstruck was able to get a victory over John Jones? I mean, that would just put him over so much, and that would for sure get him a title shot. So we'll see what happens in the future, but I really want to see John Jones in his heavyweight debut versus Jairzinho Rosenstruck. All right. Now we're going to talk about Marlon Chito Vera, the co-main event winner. I spoiled this one earlier. I do want to see Marlon Chito Vera face off against the Machine Merab. I think it would be another great bantamweight matchup to determine, okay, who's that guy that's not going to get into the top 10? Because both of these guys are currently ranked outside of the bantamweight division top 10. So it'd be very interesting to see what Chito can do to nullify the grappling of Merab. You know what Merab is going to do, like I mentioned earlier. Dodson knew he was able to kind of do his best to be slippery and get out of the way. He did get taken down 2 times, but stuffed 18. Can Chito Vera do the same? Or will he kind of just accept being taken down and see what he can do on the ground with his jiu-jitsu? Very interesting and a very intriguing matchup that I do want to see in the future, and hopefully the UFC can kind of book that matchup. All right, and finally, we have the main event winner, Stipe Miocic, getting the victory over Daniel Cormier in their trilogy. He has finished it off now. He can close the door. No more having to think about DC, because he's really been thinking about him and game planning for him over the last 2 years. So it's now time to focus on somebody new. And that could be, and I hope it is, Francis Ngannou. He deserves the title shot. He's already gotten 4 straight victories. There's nobody left for Francis to face off against. He has got to get the next title shot. Now, Stipe did beat Francis already. It actually had been 2 years ago. He nullified all of Francis's power. He wore him down, used his wrestling, and Francis was just not prepared for that type of matchup. But now he's evolved. He's changed. But so has Stipe. Stipe has also evolved, and he currently is in the peak of his career, just trying to mix up his offense as he did against DC. So I'm all for Francis Ngannou versus Stipe Miocic 2. That should be the fight to make. A lot of people will try to mention and bring up that, no, I think Jon Jones and Stipe would obviously be the bigger money fight, be more interesting for a pay-per-view. I just don't want Jon Jones to get an immediate title shot. He can't jump the line like that. It just doesn't look good really for the sport when you have a guy that just jumps and skips every other contender. And you just can't skip a guy like Francis Ngannou. The dude is literally the scariest guy in that division. Only thing I would obviously accept as, as an exception would be if Stipe needs time to recover. Like if he had more injuries to the eye pokes that may have occurred against Daniel Cormier, I would accept maybe Jon Jones taking on Francis Ngannou. That would really be his only matchup, because again, it would give more money to Francis Ngannou, more popularity, and if he gets a victory over one of the greatest of all time, that just sets him up even more for a second fight against Stipe Miocic. So that's really what I'm looking for in Stipe's future. But hopefully he recovers. Hopefully he takes his time to spend time with his family. And again, this guy is just cementing his legacy as one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. So congratulations to Stipe Miocic at UFC 252 and to all the main event winners as well. All right, everybody, that's all the segments that I really wanted to cover in this episode 9 of the Flying Knee KO podcast. It felt good to be back. I try to make as much more content as I can, maybe bring in a few more guests. I'm really pumped for UFC 253, which is in September. That will be Israel Adesanya versus Paulo Costa. I cannot wait. Israel is really one of my favorite fighters. The style bender just puts on such great performances, and I really want to see how he's going to match up against Paulo Costa, who's just straight savage. The man is so damn lethal. The dude's jacked. I mean, it's unbelievable. But that is a ways away. We still have a few more fight nights that we can cover as well. But I appreciate everybody listening. Let me know if you have any questions, any comments. Let me know your thoughts. Always put it down in the comments. You can always reach out to me at vicplaybyplay@gmail.com if you ever want to just talk, bring up any questions, feedback. I'll take it all, really. But thank you so much, guys. You guys have a great rest of your week, and I'll catch you guys in the next episode of the Flying Knee KO podcast.